Welcome back to another episode of The Hit. My name is James Layton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where every single week I bring you a leader from our sector to discuss some of the biggest challenges in UK housing today. Today I was delighted to be joined by David Bogle, Chief Executive of Hightown Housing. We spoke at length around the 28 years at the helm of Hightown, how he's been a standout advocate for tackling homelessness in the UK, how he created a group called Homes for Cathy to bring other housing associations in on his pledge to try and solve the homelessness crisis. And we talk about the development programme and what he hopes for Hightown in the future. I hope you like this episode, and if you do, I'd ask that you like and subscribe. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, James. Delighted to be here.
Looking forward to this one. As I always like to start, do you mind just by giving us a little bit of introduction to yourself for the listeners, please?
Well, I'm been in the sector for a long while. I've been Chief Executive of Hightown for about 28 years. Previously worked in Anchor Housing Association and then previously in local government. We've grown a lot, Hightown, over the years, so it's been a great adventure. And in the last, I suppose, 8 years, I particularly got involved in homelessness, helped to form the Homes for Cathy group with other chief executives, following on from the 50th anniversary of Cathy Come Home, the drama documentary, Ken Loach, being shown on BBC TV, which we thought was a sort of seminal moment. And actually a lot of housing associations like Hightown were formed at that time in response to that programme. So we've been working on with the Homes for Cathy group, trying to raise the profile of homelessness and broadly encouraging housing associations who have resources to do more on homelessness, in addition to all the fantastic stuff they're already doing.
Amazing. I mean, we'll unpack all of that, I'm sure, but 28 years in the sector is an unbelievable achievement, especially 28 years at the helm of Hightown. Talk me through some of the key fundamental things that have changed in that period, certainly from an organisation, but what have you seen as some of the key things that have evolved in the sector over that period of time?
Yeah, so I suppose the kind of priority of housing in the sort of list of political priorities has more or less stayed the same, I think. Although I think when we kind of started, there was more of a common understanding that there needed to be social housing, and that social housing was an important part of communities. And of course, in those days, we used to get very high grants. So, the grant would cover 90% of the cost of building a new home, and therefore the rents could be quite low, social rents. So a big change was when we brought private finance came into the sector in 1989, I think, and then again when the new coalition government in 2010 cut grant levels, and the rents had to rise substantially to fill the gap. So. Yeah. New developments since 2011 or so have been at these higher so-called affordable rents. And at various times during over the years, housing associations have had to decide whether to take the poison chalice of government funding and all that came along with, or kind of not do that and forge their own cause. Yeah. So I suppose those are the fairly fundamental changes. And of course, as a result of the higher rents, we've seen more housing benefit bill rising, benefits bill rising generally in the country as a whole, and all kinds of issues, perhaps unforeseen, stemming from all of that. So I think they're probably the main changes. And obviously we've seen the rise of home ownership under Margaret Thatcher, and then it's sort of dropped a bit, and we've got now loads of people having to rent privately because there's not enough social housing around and they can't afford to buy a home. And in the last 12 years or so, we've seen the rise of homelessness, again, rough sleeping reappearing, over 100,000 families in temporary accommodation. So things have not really got better in the last 12
No,
years. We've
no.
been fighting a losing battle in some ways, but it's important not to give up and keep going, really, because there's
Yeah.
a tremendous need out there.
Yeah. What have been some of the things that, as a leader, because 28 years in an organization, what have been some of the things that you've had to adapt to in your career to this point? Because clearly, like, in that time, digitalization, there's loads of things that have come in, but what have been some of the key fundamental things that you've had to continue to upskill yourself in as a leader in that period, would you say?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's a learning process, isn't it? When you come to a job, you're desperate to succeed, and perhaps you're quite tough, maybe ruthless. It's typical, isn't it, for a
Of
new
course.
chief executive to change things around, and some people, the culture changes to a certain extent, and some people leave, and you gradually perhaps get things working the way you want to, and then you become a bit more relaxed. You trust the people you've recruited, and hopefully can let go a bit and let them, in the famous words, let 1,000 flowers bloom, and have a more participative and creative organization. And I guess perhaps as you get older, also, you get more philosophical,
Yeah.
see the bigger trends, see things coming round again that
Yeah.
you've already been through, see some of the stuff that you can't solve because they're a kind of perennial issue, and 1,000-year problem sometimes of not enough housing, not enough affordable housing, and try to make an impact in a more strategic way, but also appreciate the value of small gains as well, and perhaps celebrate a bit more
Yeah, of course.
when you actually do deliver some great stuff, which Hightown has done, thanks to our brilliant staff.
Yeah, amazing. And just focusing on Hightown, walk us through, and it's a long period, but some of the key milestones when you started. What was the size of the business then? And you've said you've gone through some tremendous growth in that period, and take us to present day, and just some of the key milestones in that growth journey. Really, I'd be keen to hear that.
Yeah, well, we were quite small when I came, 1,500 units, and now we're 8,500. And I think the turnover was about 3 million, and now it's 126 million. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
grown a lot. Key things. Well, I had great support from my chair and board early on. I had an early chair, Pat Lana, and we had a sort of this vision of trying to become an important player in Hertfordshire, because we saw the need and the limited number of housing associations doing good stuff. I think key things were really, one, sticking with care and supported housing for all that time, because a lot of housing associations have exited that because it's so difficult. The funding is low. You're
Yeah.
not making any surplus really on it, and you're recruiting fairly low wage people because that's all you can afford with the grant that you get. So managing that to stack up over 28 years and to grow that business has been brilliant. On the development side, the key thing really, I think, was I forget exactly which year it was, but it was probably about 15 years ago when we became a partner with we were urged to merge with another housing association to create some bulk in our development program, but we decided to stick it out, and we got funding, and then we managed to grow the program, from 50 to 100 units a year, gradually to 300, and then over recent years to 500 or 600. So it was key us sticking to our guns and deciding not to merge, and being able to get funding in our own right from banks, because we had the business in a good position financially. It's been fantastic to see the growth, and more importantly, to see us housing homeless households who otherwise would be in temporary accommodation or even rough sleeping. Last year, almost half of our lettings were to homeless households, which is well above the average. So that commitment from the staff to actually trying to end the housing and homelessness crisis has been fantastic, I think. It's amazing how Homes for Cathy can have an effect on the whole organisation, and staff are very much behind those values and that culture.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about Homes for Cathy in a lot of detail, but firstly, congratulations. I saw that you'd exceeded your home delivery target this year. Talk us through that, because you've obviously been an ambassador, and as you've said, you grew from 100 to 200 to 300 to now 5. How's that evolved, and so how important is it that we continue to create more housing in the sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always seen it, and not all chief executives agree with this, and I'm not entirely sure many politicians and regulators necessarily agree with it. But I always thought that, we started as a housing association in the post-Cathy Come Home era, and, volunteers and churches came together to form Hightown because they wanted to do something about homeless. And I think that's the enduring social purpose of a housing association.
Of course.
Fundamentally, we're here to get people out of not having a home into a decent, affordable, well-managed, secure house, home, flat, whatever. So, that, to me, that's absolutely critical to why we exist as an organisation. And so that's what I've focused on, and been lucky to have loads of people supporting me and helping me along the road. And so I always think that if we can deliver more, and we have really, what do they call it? What was the famous phrase? Sweat your assets. That was the phrase used in 2008 to sweat our assets to make absolute maximum benefit from the financial position we were in. Deliver surpluses, which then get ploughed back into building more homes, getting the support of Homes England and the grant-giving organisations, but also, since for many years it's been about attracting borrowing from banks and the city, and you've got to be, financially strong to be able to do that. So all that coming together, and being able to, and to be fair, there's lots of moral dilemmas along the way, like rent levels. We'd love to do lower rents, but if we're going to develop, we have to accept that affordable rents are the current regime. Hopefully that will change, but the alternative to having people in affordable rents is them being in the private sector. So they would pay even a higher rent, and for probably a less good landlord and a less secure tenancy. So it's about, to a certain extent, it's about sort of compromises along the way.
Yeah, of course. And I think there's a bravery needed in the sector at the moment to continue the development programs, because it's the one that people seem to be dropping in their cycle. But it feels like the housing crisis will worsen, and then we'll have a much bigger target to hit in 3 or 4 years. What's your view on the housing crisis? Is it just always going to be there, or are we ever going to be able to plug this gap that we have in the sector?
Yeah, I mean, this is the big problem, that it is pure capitalism, housing, really. We try to intervene, but at the end of the day, you've still got to, we've got a regulator and a government that sets our rents, but actually to deliver a housing scheme, you've got to buy land at the market rate, and you've got to pay a contractor at the market rate to build it. So although we don't make we're not profit making, so there's not that profit element. We've still got to make it stack up commercially. And while there's a scarcity of land and huge demand for housing in our area, Herts, Beds and Bucks, there's always going to be price inflation on land and housing, and we're competing against that all the time. And of course, that means the affordability issues get worse for the people that we tend to house. And then,
Of course.
People are forced into homelessness because, they can't afford the rents. They go to the local council puts them in temporary accommodation. But there's still, Luton's got 1,000 families in temporary accommodation. And there's not enough social housing vacancies or being built in Luton to meet them. So those people are going to have to go back into the private sector somehow or other, most of them, unless Hightown can, and the council and other housing associations can build some housing, affordable housing.
Yeah. It's a difficult situation, isn't it? And it's one that I don't think, like you said, it's a 1,000-year problem. It feels like that. This one feels particularly like it will go on for the next 100 years, because it feels like I've been in the market 15 years, and it's certainly done 3 cycles in that period at least, where there's been a real emphasis on it, and there's always something else that crops up. And at the moment, there's so many challenges. I bet as being a chief exec, this is one of the more difficult periods of your career, because how do you fix all the things that you need to fix? Cost of living crisis, we've got decent home standards coming back, we've got the new build housing crisis. There's a lot to fix and not a lot of budget to fix it with. So it must be a difficult time to be a chief executive right now.
Yeah, I think this year is going to be the hardest year financially that we've had. With interest rates rising. And, I just looked at the financial markets today, and the 10-year gilt's risen again. And we're looking to borrow. We need to borrow some more money soon. We're going to be going to the market at possibly the worst possible time, but we've got to have the funding for our program that we've got for the next 2 or 3 years. So there's that, plus the fact that you've got general inflation in costs of materials. The staff, quite rightly expect a decent pay rise. And then we've got other pressures coming on us. There's fire safety. Hightown's in a relatively good position, but the sector's not particularly in a good position, discovering all kinds of defects and problems. Then we've got, targets on zero carbon.
Of course.
Again, some association, because we've built a lot in the last 15 years, we've got better rated stock than most. But, as the country built hundreds of thousands of council homes in the 50s, 60s, and they're now 60, 70 years old. They're not, some of them not particularly well built. Where's the money going to come to upgrade those homes to a decent energy rating? And there's lots of housing associations who have ex-council stock. So then there's the issue of the rent increase. We got 7%. That was less than inflation. A lot of money for our tenants to find, but because it was less than inflation, our finances are worse because of that rent increase. And then what's going to happen next September? And we haven't really got a rent policy at the moment. It was CPI +1, but that was abandoned this year. And what's going to happen next year? How do we do a business plan when we don't know what our income's going to rise by? So sorry, loads of balls.
Yeah, there is. I think,
But housing associations are in a relatively good place compared with lots of other organisations, especially public sector organisations who have generally seen cuts and even more pressure on their finances. So we've got to try and remain optimistic.
Yeah, and look, it's again, there'll be another cycle of this, but certainly feels like a difficult time right now. Talk to me about Cathy Come Home. So 1966, on the back of the film made around homelessness. Talk us about the origination then of Homes for Cathy, because just want to go back to the beginning and then we can work through what's happened since. But just start from the beginning and just give us a bit of an overview of the project and the.
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened was I phoned up a couple of chief executives, Tony Stacey at South Yorkshire and Sue Barrett at Hasto. Spoke a bit with the Fed, National Housing Federation, and said, look, it's the 50th anniversary of Cathy Come Home coming up, a lot of traditional housing associations were formed then, including Hightown, South Yorkshire, Hastow and others, Broadland. We ought to be doing something about this,
Of course.
and celebrating it. At the time, the NatFed were focused on other stuff. So the five of us, there was Paul Doe from Shepherd's Bush as well, and Michael Newey from Broadland. We all decided we'd have a go at celebrating this anniversary and arranged for stuff in the House of Lords, talked to Crisis, came up with some commitments that we could perhaps focus on. Talked with Cardboard Citizens, a theatre group that were doing some events for based on Cathy Come Home, a play. And that all came together and we kind of celebrated the anniversary. And then I thought we'd sort of stopped really, but the others said, no, we ought to keep going. And so we tried to roll it out to other organisations who weren't necessarily those traditional housing associations, but had a keen interest in homelessness. And it kind of went from there, really. And as I say, we worked closely with Crisis. We had some inspirational people like Tony and Paul and Sue and Michael are part of it all, and Martin Hancock from BPHA, who are really committed to the idea that housing associations should be doing more on homelessness, even though they'd done loads. I mean, it wasn't that we were criticising, it was just that we felt we should all be doing more. And it went from there, really. And we managed to gain some traction. We've had conferences which have been well attended and well supported. We've got a website, we've done seminars, we've done local events. And of course, local authorities, it's a big problem for them, homelessness. So they're keen. Some of them early on in the time said housing associations are part of the problem rather than the solution, which I found very upsetting and sort of added to my commitment to try to change that round and see housing associations as part of the solution to homelessness. And it's gone from there. And, we're still campaigning, pressurising, trying to get associations to adopt the commitments and audit their work against that, trying to get the regulators to do more, because sometimes what gets measured gets done. Quoting the example of the Scottish regulator where they do focus more on homelessness up there, and just trying to make sure also that the social housing regulation bill and all the new legislation that comes in, it doesn't focus so much on existing tenants that it forgets those people who haven't got a tenancy with a housing association and a secure tenancy and a good landlord. And I think I can bang on for years about this, but
no, I love it.
I think at a time when the sector's under pressure from the media, being criticised heavily, a commitment to homelessness and a demonstrable achievements in helping people out of homelessness, is a good thing for the sector, because we've been doing all this for decades. We do some fantastic stuff as a sector, and sometimes it's sort of overlooked in focusing on what we do wrong sometimes.
And I think it's the one reason I do the podcast is that I'm, bored of the negative light being shone on our sector, but I want to shine some positive light because there's so much good stuff that we do daily. I mean, I see it every day in my career. Just as a high level, I want to come back to Homes for Cathy as well and do some more because I've got some more questions. But as a high level thought from you yourself, not necessarily as a chair of Homes for Cathy, is the problem getting worse? And what is the actual fix to homelessness? Like, what can we do as a country to start to fix homelessness? I know there's some obvious answers there, but what's your opinion on what we could do to fix it? Because I'm in Manchester, we support lots of local charities here. They're growing, the charity numbers are growing. So if the charity numbers are growing, the problem's rising. What do you think we can do to kind of fix some of these things on a local and then national level?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I mean, I was not and still am not really an expert on homelessness.
No.
There's these charities in Manchester and Birmingham and London and other cities that do absolutely fantastic work with some
Yeah.
incredibly dedicated people, and they don't give up. It's one step forward and one step back with some of the clients they've got, but they don't stop trying to help. I mean, I think, obviously my focus is on the housing led side
Of
of
course.
ending homelessness. So, and obviously the more affordable or the more social rent homes we can build, for poorer people, some of whom are homeless, or people in temporary accommodation, the better. I mean, people do say it was better at the end of the last Labour government, um, and things have got worse in the last 13 years. But, I've seen a real commitment from some Conservative ministers over the years to
Same.
have
Yeah.
a rough sleeping strategy to end rough sleeping. But it is very difficult, and
It
people
is.
have got multiple problems, drugs, alcohol, but mental health problems and everything else. And as I say, we do housing first projects. We do a lot of homelessness projects, and we have successes, but we also have times when people relapse, and you've got to keep working with them and hope to get
Yeah.
them through this period of because times are tough for people.
They are, and when we do, like, all of our team go out and do a half a day in the community each month, and we chose a charity this month, really good charity, amazing people. And what I realised is housing is one step of the process to getting someone off the streets from being homeless, actually. Yes, that solves it, but then there's the educational piece and getting them into work and giving them a platform. And there's just so many factors to it. It's a complex case, and it's a complex area, I think. When I was doing some research for this, though, I saw that as part of your role as chair, what you had done is created 9 commitments that the organisations that support Homes Cathy were going to use as tools for best practice. Talk us through some of those. I'd be interested to understand those.
Yeah, as I say, we worked with Crisis. Crisis had a plan for ending homelessness a few years ago, and we decided that part of that plan would be this list of commitments for housing associations, which we call the Homes Cathy commitments. And they're not rocket science, really. They're looking at different aspects of homelessness and the problems that exist in housing, and trying to have some aspirations to try to overcome them. And obviously, some of them are working with local authorities and with government. Some of them are campaigning for more resources for homelessness, for housing, but also for supported housing, for support funding, so that we can employ people to support people who've come out of homelessness. But others are housing issues that have been around for a long while, but where we can perhaps do something about it, like we increase the amount of lettings from housing associations that go to homeless households? Can we look at, when we house a homeless household, at making sure that tenancy succeeds and doesn't fail because they can't afford curtains or carpets or whatever, or they haven't had access to proper benefits advice? Can we reduce evictions, because a source of homelessness is evictions? Can we work more with families or people who are in difficulties with their rents, and try to overcome that so that people don't get evicted? And the most difficult one, I think, is the migrant homelessness one, where you've got people coming from other parts of the world, well, Europe, and they can't get access to benefits, but they're on the streets. So if they can't access benefits, they can't pay the rent that the landlord needs. So how do you solve that conundrum? But some housing associations, we might not be doing a lot, but people are doing some stuff there. And the idea was, well, if Cathy, if each association could do a little bit, maybe house 1 or 2 migrant homeless people, then that adds up to something if we all do it. So that's very
Agreed.
aspirational and difficult to solve, but you can't ignore it if you want to end rough sleeping, because there are people who just haven't got access to funds to pay the rent. So that's the kind of quick overview, I think, of it. But it's all about really trying to get chief executives and boards to prioritise homelessness over all the other kind of challenges they've got. But if we can get boards to audit what they're doing against these commitments, as a lot of associations are doing, including Riverside and South Yorkshire and Hightown and Broadlands and everyone else, then that kind of helps to focus on the problem and the social impact that can be gained from making progress in those areas.
Yeah, and how many organisations have you got involved, and how many can get involved? Like, I mean, is the plan to what's the evolution for Homes for Cathy? Is it to have lots more organisations involved? Have you got like a vision for the organisation? What's the sort of future look like for you?
Yeah, I think what we found is, there's a lot of medium-sized, smaller local housing associations who work very closely with their local authority, who are kind of prime candidates for Homes for Cathy.
Okay.
A few housing charities also who are not housing associations but are working with homelessness. One or two local authorities are very keen on making an impact on homelessness, and some organisations over the 6 years or so 7 years have been very keen one year and not so keen another year, depending on which staff they have. We'd like to get more involved with the bigger associations, the national associations who haven't. Somewhere in their history, they've often done fantastic stuff on homelessness and they're still doing some stuff, but we'd like to have them more engaged. But, and kind of working on, and that sort of links to the regulator prioritising homelessness as well, and of course ultimately to the government prioritising homelessness. And sometimes we have ministers who are very keen on it, and other times we don't. So it's also an issue for the general election. We've got to make sure homelessness is up there come the general election, and all parties give some kind of commitment on homelessness. My latest idea is to have a rally or a day of action, but I'm working on that.
It's got to be on every party's agenda, has to be, and we've got to make it that way. Yeah. And if people do want to get involved, we have lots of chief execs and lots of people that run organisations in the country listening to the podcast. If people do want to get involved with Homes for Cathy, what's the easiest way, just as a general plug, really? Is it go to the website, fill out a form, or how do they get involved? Yeah,
I think it's, obviously join Homes for Cathy, but what's a very good starting point is to have some local event in your area, because your local authorities, who are commissioning some services, homelessness services, will see it as a priority, and it's a good event to sort of, you publicise what you're doing, but also you get local strategic partners involved, and, hopefully health as well, police, because everyone's affected by people on the streets and people in temporary accommodation. So if you can do a few events, in your area, that really raises the profile of homelessness and what you're doing. And as I say, overall, of course, if we can get people off the streets, out of temporary accommodation, we can save loads of money to the public purse in health, as I say, local authorities, etc. So that's a good way of getting involved, and then hopefully also come to our conferences and help to campaign for more resources.
Yeah, okay. No, I love that, and I think people will get involved. And I actually also think that I like the idea of publishing results. Like, I've done a lot of diversity and inclusion strategies for housing associations recently, and the best thing is making yourself accountable by publishing your results, however good or bad they may be, and all of a sudden you give yourself a benchmark to improve from, and I think that's important. As we look to the future, David, I'm interested to see what you think the future of social housing looks like. So if we take a 5-year picture, what do you think we've got coming in the next 5 years as a sector?
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult, really. I don't know. I do sometimes despair that the sector's going in a particular direction. I don't like huge housing associations. I like organisations where the chief executive is reasonably in contact with the grassroots and the frontline staff. And these mergers that have occurred, often for not, very sound strategic reasons, have created huge organisations, all with different systems that have had to be brought together, different staff from different cultures, different offices. Spend a lot of time integrating it all and creating these big organisations, which sometimes lose sight of what it's all about. And I can't, unfortunately, see that changing as smaller associations, find the financial situation more difficult with their commitments and are tempted to seek, refuge in bigger organisations. So that's a worry. I do think that's something the government and the regulator ought to be looking at. Hightown could survive. We're in quite a good place, but the priority for the government surely should be having organisations, housing associations, who can build homes and house people in decent accommodation for the long run, and help perhaps to support people with disabilities, people with learning disabilities, mental health problems, people are homeless. And you'd think that government would say, well, yeah, we need these organisations, we need to support them. But, there's all kinds of history and baggage, isn't there? Like Labour prefer council housing, the Conservatives prefer home ownership, and we're stuck in the middle between different political philosophies. And of course, we've got this huge debate about building new homes nationally, and that goes in cycles. You'll have seen the cycles. 1 minute we want top-down targets from government because it's the only way. Next minute, local people have got to have an input, and people will not want a lot of development near where they live. So that tension occurs, and people win by-elections. Nearby, the Lib Dems have won a by-election on the basis of the council wanting to build too much homes. So it's a real dilemma. We need more housing, and yet we've got a system which makes it difficult to achieve. So I'm not particularly optimistic about the future, but I do think we've got to keep going. And I think housing associations, we're lucky. We've got certainly Hightown. I'm not so sure about the north, but Hightown, we've got an endless supply of customers. How many businesses know that in 6 months' time they're guaranteed to have all this income coming in, even if, I often say if we shut up shop for 3 months or 6 months, 90% of our tenants will keep paying the rent. For most businesses, if you stop providing a service, you immediately lose.
Such a good point, that
income.
So such a good point.
We've got a lot of things going for us, and we've got to make the most of that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think being candid and being realistic about the challenge that we all face is important. It's pointless always shining a positive light. I wish the media would look at the good things that we do in our sector more, and I wish that we weren't used as a political football, the housing sector sometimes, because clearly that's not helping our case.
I don't like all the blame that's attributed. We've got to be positive and constructive and learn from mistakes, not find that you all have to be quiet about investigating because you're scared of being prosecuted or shamed in the media. We've got to learn from when things go wrong, not have that conversation shut down.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. And I've got a couple of last things that I wanted to ask. Certainly being a leader of the length of time that you have, there's lots of aspiring leaders listening to the podcast. And one thing that I'm always asked is kind of to ask guests what advice they would give to leaders stepping into positions such as yours. What would you think if you were to summarise your 28 years at the helm of an organisation? What are some of the things people should look out to do and some of the things that they should develop themselves in to be a good leader for the future, do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think you've really got to have a handle on the finances of your organization. And you've really got to understand, the legal side of things. I was lucky. I worked for Anchor and I was in leasehold management for a while, and I understood service charges and leases and stuff like that. And it's easy to come in through a housing management route and not really get involved in the money side or the legal side. But I think if you're going to be chief executive of an organization, you've got to have a strong handle on that. I would obviously say that you've got to have a clear purpose and vision, and a complete affinity with the goals of the organization. People quickly find out if actually you're not that committed, and it's you're on a staging post to somewhere else and it's not your real passion.
Of course.
So I think if you've got that, you've got the commitment and the passion, and sometimes that will put you in hot water, I think, from time to time. But you've got to kind of live with that, because most people will stick with someone who's totally committed, even if they make mistakes. But you've also got that grounding in understanding the law and the legal side of things and the finance side. Then you'll probably do very well. That would be my kind of advice.
Yeah, no, and that's great advice. And I think something that it's interesting. I see so many routes to chief exec these days, comms, marketing, housing, and you're like, there's so much to plug in terms of gaps in skill set wherever you come through. But like you say, good handle of finances at the moment is really imperative, I think. So final thing for me is...
I think I've got a good... the fact that I was a housing officer in the London Borough of Southwark so many years ago is quite good for my credibility, because I can sort of say to housing officers, well, I've done this job. I think it does help if the chief executive has actually come up through the ranks, but not everyone can or does.
Or will. No, that's a good advice. And as we finish off, just quickly, what are you excited about, or what do you hope to see for Hightown in the future or in the coming years? What are you really excited about, and what are you hopeful for that you can achieve at Hightown?
Yeah, I think it's more of the same. I think that's the only problem with being in an organisation for a long while. If you think it's been successful and you believe in what you're doing, you want to keep it going. So, I'm keen that we keep doing our care and supported housing, that we can do more on homelessness and mental health housing, and learning disability housing, but also that we keep building and we get through this current crisis and can keep developing new homes. And maybe, we'll get some more funding. The shelter ask of 90,000 social rented homes, we're still banging on about that. And you never know, maybe one day a government will realise that investing in infrastructure, in actual bricks and mortar, is better than wasting money on benefits. That you've got to invest long term in housing, and that will save you in the long run in revenue costs. I think it's going to be a difficult 5 years, but I'm optimistic for Hightown that we can survive, that we can stay independent. We can get to 10,000 homes maybe in the next 2 or 3 years, and have more resources to do more valuable stuff, basically in the housing and social care sphere.
Amazing. What a lovely way to finish. David, honestly, such a passion and a real clear vision and purpose for your organisation. And I think the Homes for Cathy movement and the things that you've done are clearly from a place of passion rather than something that you feel you have to do. And I think it comes across really authentic in the way that you lead your organisation. So thank you for coming on the podcast. And I really look forward to tracking the journey for Homes for Cathy and for obviously Hightown as well.
Thanks very much, James. Thank you.
Cheers, David. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Hip. If you'd like to hear more from us, please be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast platform. We are also running a 30-minute clinic free of charge to any clients that want to recruit in a more inclusive way. For more information, please reach out to us on our website, andersonjames.com.